Good afternoon, everyone. TGIF. We're so excited to be back with Life on Purpose Live. We have Sam Black with us today. There's a lot of ministries doing a lot of things, and he's with Covenant Eyes, has been for 16 years. They deal with the topic of pornography, and today we're particularly going to talk about how this is affecting the church. I'm sure we'll get into a little breakdown of that, but Sam, welcome. So glad to have you.
Beth, thank you for having me here. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. So you've seen this in the last 16 years. I mean, this has been an explosion of territory for a ministry like Covenant Eyes because you've tested things and you've done things and you've dealt with things, but you're coming at this from a very productive position. So let's talk about what you've learned over 16 years of how to tackle a topic with grace and dignity, but also truth.
Yeah, we need to understand within the church that pornography is literally impacting every ministry in the church. And often we have sidelined this conversation to sometimes having the conversation about it at a men's retreat. And it typically boiled down to don't do that. God's not for that. Stop that. Um, and there's been warnings about how detrimental it can be to your mind, body, and spirit. And all of that is true.
Yeah.
But what we need to do is we need to dive in a little bit deeper into this topic and then recognize how pornography is. Those men, we've often thought, well, they're just struggling because they're just men, or that. And what I've often found is not just found, this is backed up by science, by counselors, Christian counselors, and story after story that I've heard talked individually to thousands of people, that often those who struggle most deeply with pornography were exposed at an early age. And so when we begin understanding how pornography starts impacting our churches at children's ministry and is going all the way up to teen ministry and adult ministry and our marriage ministries, my goodness, we have retreats, we talk about communication, but we abandon the topic of pornography. And yet in 56% of divorce cases today, a major contributing factor to the split is one spouse's compulsive use of pornography. So we need to understand this holistically as a church and then begin creating a safe place and a safe process where we provide healing across the board. The church is God's plan A. And we've abandoned this topic in many ways.
So we know that we're in a crisis, a spiritual crisis, a health crisis. I mean, we have people feeling isolated at an all-time high, depression,
Mm.
anxiety at an all-time high. I mean, people are really wrestling with so many things and walking around just, tight and worried and anxious. And one of those contributors is the lack of authentic relationship
Mm.
and intimacy in relationship, which pornography is the number one enemy of that because it attacks the intimacy at the core. Explain that, because people want to be close and have that perfect someone, but if that's in the middle of the two of you, that's going to disrupt the relationship. Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
There's about a dozen ways we could take that topic on, right? We could talk about it in marriage. We could talk about in individual relationships. The opposite of addictive behavior is connection. That's one thing we need to keep in mind. The opposite of
Hmm.
addiction is connection. And
Wow.
and so where authenticity builds um, really an intimate connection that is contagious and it's empowering. Within a safe place, people hear that they are not a problem, but a person, that their identity is found in Christ and not in their sin. That's where we begin having that conversation in the church, too. And within that relationship, there's many men and women who say, man, I'm struggling, but I don't feel safe telling anyone at my church. Within the church, there's often what I call a spectrum. And on one side of the spectrum is it's safe to come as you are. You're just not called to change. We just don't get into anybody's business about anything. You just come and that's okay. That sounds like a very progressive church, right? And on the
Mhm.
other side, it is not okay for Christians to have issues and struggles in their life. And if they come forward, then they're often set aside, pushed aside, shamed. And in the middle, where we really want to be, is a safe church where it's okay to come as you are, even as a Christian, but it's not okay to stay as you are.
Mhm.
And when we create a safe place, that allows intimacy into me, see, instead of the shame and hiding. And people can be welcomed into not only a safe place, but a safe process of discipleship where people learn to discover why are they in times of struggle, in times where they feel like the things you were talking about, the tenseness, the anxiety, the frustration. And then they go and self soothe with things like pornography or food or alcohol or drugs. These are all ways that people begin managing their moods and their anxiety and their anger and their frustrations and all these other things. And that is not what God and the Bible is teaching us. We have wholeness in Him. Our identity is found in Him. When we learn through a safe place and a safe process and really grab in through the wholeness and fullness that God wants for us, then we can manage that mood in a productive and healthy way and begin taking care of ourselves in mind, body, and spirit, and do that within a community.
And so, one of the things you talked about, two big words there, secrets and shame,
Mm.
because secrets, which I guess is one of the big door of the enemy, because if you have secrets and you keep them in the dark, then you're just going to feel these mound of, gosh, if anybody really knew about the real me,
They
you know
wouldn't
they
love me
would
anymore.
they wouldn't love me anymore, they wouldn't accept me anymore. And I know a lot of churches that I've been in that did love me through really tough things,
Mm.
and
Right.
they really did. So I think that one of the things that we're called to do is bear one another's burdens. So how
We
do we
sure are.
come alongside our brothers, our sisters, and create an environment where if someone is struggling with sexual sin or pornography or anything else, we make it a safe place?
Yeah, we're as sick as our secrets.
Yes,
And
I've heard that. It's so true.
shame knows we're powerful when we're honest.
Mm,
Uh, Beth, when I go to another man in my church and say, this is where I'm struggling, and there's a part of me that says, they're going to reject me. They're not going to accept me. They're going to push me away. And instead, they wrap their arms around me, both spiritually and even physically,
yep.
and begin support me in that, then it gives me greater power through Christ, through the body of Christ, to make better choices and make better decisions and lean into where I'm struggling.
Oh,
I'll just tell you a brief story about how I found myself stuck in pornography years ago.
okay.
And it's a common theme that you will hear from men and women. As we talked about, as counselors back this up, that there are three components of people becoming stuck in pornography: it's the early exposure, the ongoing repetition, and the drama and trauma that can happen, especially early in life, but at other places too. I was 10 years old when I was exposed to pornography. I had come out of our home in Florida, and my brother, I'm going to date myself a little bit here, but my brother was looking at a magazine sideways, and that didn't make any sense to me. It looked peculiar. How can you look at a
Mm,
magazine sideways?
yeah.
And I looked at him and his friend, and I says, "What are you guys looking at?" And they turned it around, and I had never seen nudity before. And even though I grew up in a Christian home, I didn't look away. I stepped forward
Yep.
because you see, every child is naturally curious about what the opposite sex looks like without clothes. That's natural. But pornography, especially today's pornography, isn't just nudity, it is demeaning, debasing, typically video, uh,
Hmm.
violent. And so it can be very shocking for a child's brain. And
Yeah.
their that neurochemistry uh, lights up neural pathways and neurochemistry that just draws that child in. It's hard for a child to look away.
Hmm.
And so, but the other part of that, the repetition, that step two, I had a friend and his dad had pornography that was falling out of his closet. It looked sort of like a waterfall where there's this stacks of pornography on a shelf and it was falling over and a pool of it on the floor. And I could take anything I wanted and I did. The third part of this is that trauma and impact on our mind and spirit. Even though I came from a Christian home, it was a violent home. And when I felt fear or frustration, I could run to pornography. And that's where there's a flip in the whole thing as well, where pornography becomes escapism. And with that repetition, burning the neural pathways in the brain, people begin managing their moods, managing their frustrations or anger, their what I call triggers. SEE, I call them C triggers. They're social, emotional, and environmental
Mm.
triggers that happen in our world. And when those triggers are tripped, then they can run to pornography. And that's where it really becomes a stronghold in someone's life. And through that experience, I set the blocks and the bars in place of my own struggle and stronghold of pornography. I locked the door and threw away the key. And by the way, Beth, nobody keeps the key.
Yeah.
And what I needed was for someone to come along and begin helping me take a step into discipleship. And I'm probably among the most fortunate men you're going to meet. By this time in my adult, I have taken pornography with me from middle school to high school to college and into my marriage. And my wife is attending a small church in our home, in our little town here. And I've been agnostic by this point, but she asked if I'll go with her to a marriage class. And these teachers were a little bit odd. They would close the door and look at the class and they would say, "This is a safe place. And what is said here stays here." And in that environment, people were honest about the horrible things that they said to their spouse or the argument they had and how silly and upset they got and over these things. And in that environment, I also discovered that pornography could be compulsive and addictive, and that was a great relief for me. From a secular point of view, it meant evolution didn't make me this way.
Mm.
From a spiritual point of view, it meant God didn't make me this way. And I didn't have to stay with this way. With men who came alongside me, I got to take steps on a journey to freedom to reshape my mind and reshape my brain. And so I wrote this book with a lot of empathy because today I can um, help a I can understand why a pastor would go, why would anybody struggle with that? Why would they go down something? Why would they do something they know is so destructive? Because I can't, pornography doesn't hold that attraction to me now. And so I empathize with that pastor who doesn't clearly understand, but I want to help them understand so they can. And so I wrote this book as a primer for ministry leaders and pastors so they can really engage their parents to protect their kids, to also help men and women who are struggling, to restore marriages, to create safety in the church where people go on fire. And there's when we take a break here, I'll let you talk, but there's significant issues why it's so impactful so supportive for the church.
Well, and so you talked about the brain. Sometimes we think
Mhm.
we're doing something, and it's just a quick fix, and a 15-minute this or a 30-minute that or a movie is not going to hurt me for the long haul. Once I turn it off, I turn it off. But it keeps going, does it not?
Mm. It is. It is said that, yeah, what we put into our brains matters.
Yeah.
It igniting neural pathways in our brains. Dopamine is, you know, let me back up just a second. We have to understand that God designed our bodies and he created sex and he made it beautiful.
Yes.
But pornography is not sex. It is not God's design. It is a hijacking of what God created. And so when things are hijacked, when things are corrupted, then it tries to play off the things that uh, can make it so impactful. So, in God's design, dopamine fires off when you're with your spouse, and it gives you a spritz of something that feels good. You feel attracted. It helps those dopamine helps burn memories into your brain along with norepinephrine, and those memories become stuck. And so, in God's design, you and your spouse are engaging in a beautiful expression of love and connection. And there's more chemistry that goes along with that. But dopamine can focus your attention to the point of tunnel vision. God's design. The rest of the world disappears. You are with your spouse. But with with dopamine also for tunnel vision, it happens with pornography as well. And so people can become hyper focused on it and they become dissatisfied with something they've seen before because
Hmm.
dopamine loves novelty. And in the marriage relationship, well, there's many things to create novelty. There's the sound of a voice, a touch, a kiss. Those things are beautiful and are ever changing, but not so with the same image or the same video. So people keep going to harder and harder things. I call it the porn rut, where people become stuck in this rut because they become sensitized first, and that's very easy for them. And that means that it doesn't take very much for them to get turned on anymore. They've
Hmm.
done this so much that it pushes them into it. They also become desensitized, meaning that the things that used to excite aren't as exciting enough anymore. So they keep upping the ante. And as you were talking about, you start watching something and it takes you deeper and deeper. And pornography will take you to places you never thought you'd go, do things you had never thought you would do, pay a price that you never thought you'd pay, and hurt people you never wanted to harm.
It's so true. And I heard last weekend, I think that there are over 750 reality shows on TV,
Mm,
of which none of them are real. They say that it's real. I mean,
mm,
housewives from wherever. I mean, it's also scripted. And so, one of the key things to remember about pornography is it's not real. It's fake. It's fake sex. So, if you try to reproduce that in a relationship, then you're trying to recreate something that was never real. And isn't that
mm.
important for people to remember, is that what you're watching is actors and actresses? This is not something they're really engaging in. This is something they're paid to do.
Even worse than that, pornography is a major contributor to trafficking.
Yes.
That the people you see, oh my goodness, the horrors behind it
Yeah.
are uh, there's a fantasy experience that's going on in your brain that isn't going on for them. That the reason
Right.
there's so much drug abuse and alcohol abuse on a pornography set, I've spoken to many uh, former porn actresses and porn actors who have come out of that. And I say actors and actors, I should say it's something else, but um, they talk about the horrors on those sets, what was done to people, and thank God for many of them who've come to Christ and and have abandoned that lifestyle. And they are often, when they leave and especially go to become followers of Christ, they are often not only ostracized, they are blackmailed and many other things. It is so. There is, don't take pornography as, and this is the lie. And let me tell you a story about an 8-year-old boy that um, had been exposed when he was exposing another 8-year-old boy to pornography. And when the parent came by and scooped up the device and they found that the pornography was in their home, and this 8-year-old boy had brought it with them. They confronted him and said, "Hey, this isn't reality. This is, people can be hurt by this, and this can hurt you. Did you know that?" And he goes, "Oh, don't you understand? They're just getting paid for that." And so our children are being programmed from a very young age
Hmm.
about it's just fantasy. It's all okay. This fantasy is harmful. It's
Yeah.
harmful to the people making it. It's harmful to the people viewing it.
Yeah. So, we look around the world as we as believers and even people that
Mhm.
are not, and we see the sexual perversiveness of everything, commercials, TV shows, and we're like, what do we do? How can we collectively have an impact when it seems like we have so lost this game that it's so taken over? We have no hope of, if whatever, and people look at it and they're like, man, we have lost this war. What in the world can little old me do? So what do you
Mm.
say to those people that wonder, what can we do to come against this onslaught that we see today?
I'm going to say something very hard, Beth. This is going to be tough for many of our listeners, but judgment begins in the house of God. What are you doing in your home?
Hmm.
What are you doing in your church to set yourself apart? Because we are called to be set apart, right?
Hmm.
And when we find ourselves engaged in this, we need to understand how it's impacting Christians very specifically.
Hmm.
And what is interesting is secular studies were done by the University of Oklahoma and others, and they found over and over again in their studies that use of pornography, use of this sexualized media created diminished faith, that reduced church attendance. They had more and greater doubts. They were less likely to pray. They were less likely to volunteer in their local church. And so when we don't address this well within the church, when we don't address this well as Christians, when we don't look at ourselves well and say, I'm struggling. I've been struggling for a long time. And you know what? I've been saying to myself, I'll try a little harder on my own over and over again, and nothing has changed. Guess what? It's time to do something different and really take this on, because I want your listeners to know that they can live in freedom from pornography. That if your spouse is struggling with pornography, you can help them um, and refer to them to resources and support that can really help. And
Hmm.
what we have found through these studies is that when people go through a safe place and a safe process to find real life change, then all the things that are flipped, instead of reduced church attendance, there's greater church attendance. Where there was less faith, there was greater faith, because every process that I listen to the Healing Church calls us to return to the church and be uh, discipled through a safe process. And so when we talk about volunteerism, volunteerism grows. In fact, part of my research in this book is I went to churches across the United States that were doing this work well. And there are many churches who are really doing this work well. And what the local pastors were telling me is I don't do more work now because of all this of the what we're doing. I do less. I have champions. I've raised disciples who've created disciples, and they continually give back to the church. So my workload has decreased rather than increased. And
Yeah.
so it is imperative that we stop saying that, hey, this is a struggle that some of us will always struggle with. And then we look out at the rest of the world and we blame the world for how we are following Christ or not following Christ and his teachings.
So in your book, it's I read your quote from Max Lucado, and he said, if you're looking for a book that's going to point fingers and shame, shame, shame on people, this is not that book. So, you're creating environments where people can not only say, "Hey, I'm really, really struggling," but they can find healing in the struggle by a church being prepared to take that person and disciple them through. And then not only that, but get to the point where they become ambassadors in the church, because there's nothing better than someone who's walking in freedom and confident of who they are,
Right?
especially someone who knows God has helped them break through from
Yeah.
something. So in your book are those tools, correct?
So I did a number of things. One, I found that many pastors and ministry leaders do not know the resources that are available.
Yep.
And so I broke these down into four categories. One is an easy lift, something you can do today, even though you don't know how to do anything else. Right? You're just like,
Yeah.
okay, I want to do something.
Fast facts. Give me
Right?
something. Yeah.
The our some of our toughest enemies is procrastination is the killer of good intentions.
Yeah.
And we want perfectionism. We want to do it perfectly before we do anything. And so what happens often is time elapses and nothing is accomplished. So I broke these down so that there is an easy lift, something you can do today, a small lift, which requires just a little more uh, review and of materials, etc. There is a medium lift and a large lift. And so you can incrementally grow in your church, and but begin starting today. The founder of Covenant Eyes, Rhonda Haas, has a saying. It says, "When is now a good time?" And that simply means now is a good time, right?
Yeah.
Now is the time to get started. And so I really encourage uh, pastors and ministry leaders to check out thehealingchurch.com, where they can download the introduction and the first chapter for free and buy the book wherever you normally buy books online. Thehealingchurch.com is a good place to get just familiar more with what's in the book as well.
And as someone who's walked through this yourself,
Mm-hmm.
you stand here as proof that these processes and these, I'm a big believer that we have to do the work. You
Yeah.
can't just have a magic brush and go see a pastor and let them lay hands on you and all of a sudden you're better. You have to do the work. And what you're doing is you're providing an outline to do the work and
And
to
out.
walk through the freedom. And that's a very important process, right?
Yes, yes, right. And I think it's important for us to take a, a an overview of that we often don't feel qualified,
Mm-hmm.
but there is ways that we can press into it and discover what we don't know. Understand knowledge precedes understanding, and understanding precedes change. And with incremental change comes exponential results. We can step into this as the church, or even if someone is saying, "Hey, I am struggling, I would like to know just what could be my first step." So let
Mm-hmm.
me give you just two simple things, very easy things. Uh, Covenant Eyes provides a new app called Victory by Covenant Eyes. And within that is about 30 courses that walk you through some life change. Helps you understand, how did I get here? Why do I stay here? And how can I take a road toward freedom?
Mm-hmm.
And it maps that out for you so that you can begin starting something today.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a man who's listening, doesn't feel like, I don't know if this is, I have someone that I can talk to. And so there's an organization called Samson Society and samsonsociety.com. And it's a community of Christian men who are serving one another, lifting one another up against something in their life that is stronger than they are. Typically, it's pornography and unwanted sexual behavior, but it can be drugs and alcohol. There's often cross addictions. For women, there's a resource called sherecovery.com. Again, we underestimate that about a third of women in the church say have an ongoing struggle with pornography. About 18% of them say they're viewing multiple times a week. So they can have a community where they can feel safe as well. Uh, for parents, you're like, how can I protect my child? What could I do today that could begin helping my child? Well, I would recommend a book called, and I don't get any royalties or any credit for this at all. I just recommend the book on an ongoing basis. It's called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Junior and Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. And Good Pictures, Bad Pictures Junior is for children who are 5 to 8, and it's a read along book. And it helps them understand what good pictures are. There we go on vacation and we have pictures of our family and pictures of our pets. Those are good pictures. And it shows the family at the beach, and it shows the children in their bathing suits, and it helps a child understand this is my bathing suit area, right? And this is very important because we need to teach our children this. So this can also help protect them from sexual violence against them.
Yeah.
And so when they see that the bathing suit is uncovered, then they know that is pornography. And they can, when they see something like that, they can put their hand up and they can turn, run, and tell. And so we can equip and teach our children from a young age so they don't have the same struggles that many men and women have today, because their exposure was secret and shaming and repetitive. And so, as parents, we can equip and train our kids so they don't have that trauma. And even if our kids have been exposed, parents worry about this. Well, once they see something, they can never unsee it. Well, there's some truth to that. However, when you have a non-shaming conversation, when you have an ongoing conversation with them about God's design for us and how much He loves us and how He created a plan for us, then that is beautiful information. There's some great resources. One's called The Talk by John Fort. It talks about how you can have ongoing conversation to teach, train, and disciple your children well. So these are just examples of a few tools that I point out, but I also talk about how we can change church culture so that we are really digging into all kinds of these kinds of topics with safety and not condemnation.
I think that's so important. And I think people need to know that there are churches out there that do provide those environments. And it's important to plant in a local church so that when you do come upon a struggle or a problem, that you do have a church family and you have one that's willing to come alongside you and not leave you stuck, but help you move forward. And I think that's an important thing to remember. There's some great churches out there.
I have found these churches that were so redemptive and so welcoming, and saying, "Hey, we understand. Oh, you've got a problem. You've been coming here for years. You're a deacon at our church. Well, listen, let's not. We're not going
Yeah,
to abandon you. We're taking
that's
you
right.
on," and
Yeah.
that becomes viral when
Yeah.
people go, "Oh, wait." So who's even higher up in our church, they had a struggle, and the church said, "Hey, we're just going to ask you to take step back from your ministry role, and we're going to take you back to the foot of the cross where real healing can happen. But we're going to take you not just we're going to walk you through to understand, why have I been doing what I've been doing, and how can I really enter healing and confront those issues and live better." And when that happens, man, that just goes viral across it. That's attractive. People have problems, they have struggles, and when there is safety and a safe process, people are drawn to that. I found in all the churches where I found this healing work going, that they were drawing people from the community who had given up on church, and
Yeah.
they were saying, "I know a place where I can go, and I don't like the way I'm living. I don't
Yeah.
want this in my life anymore. I want to find real freedom." And
Yeah.
man, I couldn't believe someone loved me and accepted me like that. And
Yeah.
now I get to live in freedom, and I can't help but give that away now.
And your key word and through all of that is we. You know, we're not saying you go do all this. We're saying we're here for you, we're here with you, and we're
Yeah.
going to walk through this with you and get you through. So we could talk about this all day, but we're not going to. But we're so excited that you have the book called The Healing Church, and that you have within that book the resources and the stories and the information that people need, which is a great next step in stepping towards that freedom and that life that Christ died so that we could have. So, Sam, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your heart and your story. And thank you for the Covenant Eyes ministry work that you guys do. I know y'all have been around for a long time. You've done a lot of great work, and keep it up. We need it.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you. Have a great weekend. Have a
You
great
too.
weekend, everybody.